members of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, and friends. On COVID-19, the objective of this virtual interface is to synergize the collective effort of all stakeholders for fighting the killer virus, which has taken away lives of thousands, infected millions of people, disrupted supply chains, which can cause losses worth several trillions dollars globally. Back in India, also, we are faced with a gigantic challenge of meeting the healthcare demand in various states, particularly at identified COVID-19 hotspots, finding resources to meet the financial challenges caused by a pandemic, restoring the supply chain, which has come to a grinding halt. All stakeholders, government, industry, labor, and civil society have to work together to bail us out from the present predicament. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to just tell you briefly about our chamber, Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, started 51 years back, and we are the only bilateral chamber between India and US, and we have 12 regions and lots of members across these 12 chapters, and we're expanding membership across India and in US, other countries also. At this time, we all want to come together and appreciate the bold steps taken by our Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi, for responding to the situation in an immediate manner, where we are able to confront this very well. This teleconference is having participation from all our members and across the country, and also a lot of friends. And now I would like to introduce our eminent speaker. We have with us Mr. Parvathaneni Harish, Additional Secretary, Economic Relations, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, as the speaker. Sir, we are extremely thankful to you for sparing your time to be present at this virtual interface. We've been discussing the impact of the COVID-19 at various forums and creating ideations to help the governments at the center and states to respond to the situation and to catalyze the collective effort of the business community. We would like to convey through you, sir, that our chamber will work with you according to whatever you tell us to do in the times to come. And Mr. Harish is now the head of Division of Economic Diplomacy and States Division that deals with bilateral economic relations of India with other countries, and liaises in this regard with all 9 economic ministries of the Government of India and state governments and union territories. He also supervises the Multilateral Economic Relations Division that handles G20, BRICS, IBSA, etc. He joined IFS in 1990, and Mr. Harish has held many eminent positions, including being Ambassador to Vietnam, Consul General of India in Houston, Joint Secretary to the Honorable President of India, and has served in many other international missions and policy-related affairs. He has had a brilliant academic career. He was a gold medalist in mechanical engineering from Osmania University, and IIM Calcutta graduate, and a distinction in Arabic from American University of Cairo. He has been appointed by the Honorable Prime Minister to a special committee to deal with COVID situation as a quick responsive team to tackle this emergency. He is a member of Empowered Group to manage the industry associations, private sector, NGOs, and also international organizations, which is very important for us to know. And this is where we would like to know where we stand and what the future holds for us. and how government is working along to get us out of this system and to go ahead. We would like to look at it as a very positive future because that is how the government has been working together tirelessly. And sir, we are all with you and we are waiting to hear from you. And once again, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, madam, for your kind introduction. At the outset, I want to thank the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce and you, madam, personally for inviting me to have this virtual interaction with your distinguished membership. Friends who have joined us today in this virtual meeting, I want to thank you for sparing your time and for being part of this interaction. I have always had the pleasure of, in my earlier postings, of interacting with the Chamber when they led delegations earlier during my stint as Consul General in Houston. And in my current capacity as Additional Secretary dealing with economic relations, I've also had the pleasure of interacting with the Chamber. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to meet you virtually and to have this discussion. I will go through with the presentation, and once the presentation is over, I'll be happy to take questions and to discuss some of the issues that are of interest to you. Can we go to the first slide, Manish, after this? Friends, as we can see, this is an unprecedented global crisis that we are facing in terms of this pandemic. The pandemic is likely to drive down global GDP significantly, causing huge losses running into trillions of dollars, cause, of course, shrinking in the investments at a global level, a significant capital flight from emerging markets, as you can see. And there has been a crash in the price of oil, so the destabilization in the energy markets. The crisis, the pandemic began from China, and there's been a slowdown in China's economy. But again, as compared to the previous outbreak of a pandemic when SARS happened in 2003, China makes a significant chunk of the global GDP now as compared to then. So its impact at the global level will also be that much more. It's disrupting manufacturing supply chains and sharply curtail energy and commodity demand. I think there will be not just actual shrinking, not just in the US, but probably in much of Europe. Of course, these are estimates as we speak. And I think some of the hardest hit sectors you can see will be in automobiles, aviation, tourism, hospitality, transport, agri. But again, as I said, we will address some of these issues about what are the sectors that are more likely to be hit. I think at a time when social distancing is a norm, any industry that is dependent on social proximity will, of course, see the most significant hit. And that is something which will include, of course, hospitality, it will include tourism, it will include transport, aviation, and these are the sectors that will take a big hit. In terms of the projected economic impact on India, I think for us, the most important challenge from a human point of view is to control the spread of the disease, to limit the economic impact of the outbreak and the lockdown. We can see, of course, that there are significant downside risks. There is, of course, a global slowdown and supply chain disruptions are everywhere. I think the only silver lining we can see from our point of view is that we are dependent on hydrocarbons imports for most of our requirements. There is a significant fall in the international crude oil prices. We can hope for an early containment of COVID, and then the monetary and fiscal measures announced by the Government of India and by governments worldwide will try to address the slowdown. Sectors that are highly dependent on imports from China will feel much greater impact, including pharma, which are dependent on APIs significantly from China, textiles, and apparel sector, the automotive sector, electrical machinery. I think as compared to many countries, the import component of our overall gross manufacturing exports is lower. So as compared to many other economies, probably at a relative level, the impact in the manufacturing sector on us is much lower. There would be stress on banking and financial sectors, and of course, the destruction of global demand and to an extent domestic demand will have an impact. But as I said, the silver lining is lowered oil prices. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next? Yeah, thanks. I think in terms of the economic stimulus, the government of India has announced, of course, 1.7 trillion rupee package announced by the finance minister late last month. Focuses on cash transfers and ensuring food security. I think the PM Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, the 5 kg of rice or wheat per month free of cost to be made available, expected to benefit over 800 million people, poor people in the country. The cash transfer scheme of 2,000 rupees under the PM Kisan Yojana will be front-loaded and paid to 87 million farmers. The government has announced a medical insurance cover for healthcare staff who are at the front line fighting the pandemic. The Narega wages have been increased, will benefit over 50 million families. The beneficiaries of Ujjwala scheme will get free LPG cylinders for the next 3 months. Self-help groups, and this is a big initiative to help self-help groups, especially women-focused self-help groups, which will get up to rupees 10 lakh collateral-free loans, and states can also utilize almost 31,000 crores that is there in the Building and Construction Workers Fund, and this will benefit millions of our workers. The government of India has also said it will pay the EPF contribution for both employees and employers for the next 3 months. So I think this is part of the economic stimulus package announced. Next slide, please. Liquidity will always be a significant issue. The RBI has announced many measures that would inject liquidity into the economy, provide relief. Moratorium on payment of installments. This is playing itself out. Commercial banks have already brought out necessary circulars in terms of implementing the moratorium. There has been a slashing of the repo rate. Liquidity constraints have been eased. And the deadline for realization and repatriation for export proceeds has been increased by another 6 months. I think a lot of these measures are intended to address liquidity constraints, of course, which many in the business and industry are aware and I'm sure will face and will highlight to policymakers in the future. Next slide, please. I think this is an important aspect. Agricultural support, the government is aware that we are now in the harvesting season to be immediately followed thereafter by a new crop sowing season. There is a significant focus to ensure that the harvesting season goes on in a more coordinated fashion despite the lockdown, and that there are necessary facilities made available for storage and for wherever there are export commitments in terms of fruit exports, for example, mangoes from certain parts of the country, those export commitments are kept. I think the government has focused on having new features of the national agricultural market, the ENAM platform, to make it more user-friendly. You can see some of the on your screens, basically in terms of facilitating mobile payment facilities, enhanced features on mobile app for gate entries and payment through mobiles, and integration of farmers' database in the ENAM website. There is also an easing in agri-produce sale routes. The jurisdiction of the mandis, the APMCs, has been limited to their physical premises. The government has allowed big retailers and commodity processors to buy directly from the farmers. Likewise, the passes for movement of essential goods and the critical persons engaged has been decentralized. The focus is also on facilitating procurement of pulses from farmers, so agri is a focus area as we go into this period of lockdown, and we see probably even in the future, this will continue to be a significant focus of government effort. Next slide, please. I I think the Prime Minister has set up 11 empowered groups as quick response teams under the Disaster Management Act to tackle the overall COVID outbreak in the country. These empowered groups are headed by secretaries, and they deal with various issues. Some empowered groups are dealing with hospital equipment and hospital supplies. Other empowered groups are dealing with economy, like, for example, Empowered Group 6, of which I am a member, has been constituted under the chairmanship of the CEO of Niti Aayog. And it includes a principal scientific advisor and various other members, including the Prime Minister's office and the Ministry of Home Affairs and other organizations. This particular empowered group is tasked with dealing with international organizations, civil society organizations and NGOs in the private sector, including industry associations like yourself. So the idea is that these empowered groups will tackle as quick response teams various issues that would emerge in various sectors. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide, Manish? The Empowered Group 6 has had detailed meetings with various UN organizations, WHO, UNICEF, the World Bank, the FAO, the ADB, the UNICEF, on various aspects of their operations in India. It has held already it has sent out messages to over 10,000 NGOs that have been registered with the Darpan portal of the government, where these NGOs are registered to seek their cooperation in addressing various aspects of the lockdown and what they expect from the government in terms of facilitation of their work in this period. There have been a number of cross-sectoral dialogues with the private sector, including with the CII and with FICCI, with NASSCOM, on various aspects of business and industry, their operations, what they expect the government to do in this period of the lockdown, and what kind of facilitation they need from the government. There is also a specific focus in terms of cross-linking with Empowered Group 3 on procurement, or Empowered Group 5 on logistics. For example, in terms of how some of our industries are getting into specific aspects of developing ventilators, getting the necessary approval from regulators for their use, for production of personal protection equipment, and what more can be done in terms of procuring these PPEs in a phased manner. Many of our industries are moving into this, and this is something which is not unique to India. Even in a place like China, for example, China Petroleum, for example, was producing personal protection equipment. A lot of the auto companies were producing ventilators. So I think as part of the national effort in various countries, and it happened in the US, I think a lot of the industries are addressing immediate national needs in terms of addressing the pandemic by producing things that are required with the facilities and with the capabilities that they already have. Next slide, please. Manish, can we have the next slide? I want to focus a little bit more on this particular section. I think there is no doubt that this pandemic is probably once in a lifetime occurrence. It's a black swan event, completely unexpected. Of course, there are challenges for the nation as a whole, for our people, but it's also, of course, challenge for the business and industry. But it also opens up potential economic opportunities for us. I think the steep decline in oil prices is a positive, but again, the decline in oil prices is happening because of destruction of demand. So I think that is something while it will help our fiscal position, I think we need to do something more to kickstart our economy. What we also see is that the Digital India initiative of the government has laid enough groundwork. And now, as we move to contactless methods of delivery of services, building on the infrastructure we have so far and on the Digital India initiative, there could be a significant leg up for e-commerce players, for retailers, and for contactless methods of delivery of services. Likewise, there could be a significant focus on the agri sector, we feel, including on the frozen instant food industry chain in the food and beverage sector. But building supply chain resilience is key. This is to ensure that there is enough elasticity helping to return to original state of business quickly. I think building this resilience is very important, and it will require restructuring of the internal working of businesses and their wider networks. Next slide, Manish. What I wanted to emphasize here is that even before the pandemic hit, I think what we have seen is that because of the US-China trade dispute, various multinational companies were looking at diversifying their value chains. They were looking at having possible attractive alternate destinations for their operations. As part of this, the Ministry of External Affairs, the DPIIT, and other line ministries were keenly formulating a strategy to see how best we can position India as an attractive alternate destination for global manufacturing companies to diversify their investments and operations. And I think this was based on studying the investment climate in other countries that were also seeking to attract such investments, and matching some of the incentives that they were giving to investments. I think this was something which has preceded the outbreak of the pandemic by many months, and this is something which the government was keenly focusing on as a whole of government effort, involving line economic ministries in Delhi and various Indian embassies, missions abroad. I think the other issue is also that this particular pandemic also highlights the need for diversification of imports of Indian business and industry, so that there is an excessive reliance on one particular country or source of imports for their intermediate goods and even for basic goods. I think if you look at it in the case of certain industries like pharmaceuticals, while we have a robust industry, the excessive reliance on the active pharmaceutical ingredients imported from China has been brought into sharp relief as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. For some of the medicines, we found that we did have enough stock, but the excessive reliance on one country or one source of imports for basic raw material for the pharma industry was certainly a risk. And I think this going forward, this will be something where a significant focus will be there. I think for certain key sectors, the focus going forward is to ensure that the entire value chain is located within the country. And I think the government has set aside 10,000 crores for shifting entire manufacturing value chains for pharmaceuticals, so that even the APIs are produced in India. And I think this is an opportunity, and this is something which we will require in terms of our overall health security. The government will also create a production-linked incentive scheme for the promotion of domestic manufacturing of these critical drug intermediates and APIs within the country. Manish, next slide, please. I think going forward, not just in India, but probably around the world, there will be a relook at the entire health sector in terms of infrastructure, in terms of human resources, and what more needs to be done to strengthen it. I think what we see is that our hospital beds to population ratio, physicians to population ratio, etc., needs a significant shoring up. I think there is going to be a significant focus on improving health infrastructure in India and of boosting the human resources that the health sector would require. It will also mean that there's going to be a focus on healthcare equipment, not just ventilators, but the whole range of equipment and supplies that it would need, including PPEs and even things like sanitizers. I think in all likelihood, in India and in other countries, you will see the baseline for health infrastructure, for human resources, and for supplies will improve. And this is something I think which business and industry will look at, and this can be a significant opportunity. I think for us, this will mean that this will not only cater to the domestic demand, but this will also cater significantly to export opportunities in the medium to long term. And I think that's how business and industry needs to look at it. Next slide, Manish. So I think broadly speaking, yes, this is a challenge, and but this is also a challenge that throws up opportunities. This is an opportunity for us to probably redo some of the value chains of which we were not a part, and to see how best we can benefit from creating or being part of new value chains. Agriculture will be a focus area. I think pharma and health sectors will be key focus areas. And I think what would be required is also to see how innovatively businesses can adapt and build greater resilience in their systems to tackle this. For those businesses that are reliant on social proximity, it is a particular challenge, but then how to innovatively deliver contactless services will be the key to build such resilience in their systems. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and I'll be very happy to take questions and to have a discussion.